Chris Paul is expected to miss 6 to 8 weeks after suffering a fractured thumb on this play. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and in this video, we're going to take a look at what exactly happened with Chris Paul's thumb and what this injury means. Now, the official word is 6 to 8 weeks with specifically an avulsion fracture of his thumb. First of all, when did this happen? Of course, the play last week where we saw Paul actually get ejected, beforehand, he was clearly grabbing his thumb. We heard he was getting an MRI before All-Star weekend, but it was right here after they delivered this pass. You can see his right hand kind of right there makes contact with the Rockets player as he's kind of following through. This mechanism is kind of analogous to when a football quarterback follows through and hits their thumb on a defender's helmet. Here as Paul is following through, his thumb basically gets jammed right there, kind of in this direction on the defender's forearm. And so as his arm comes through, the thumb hits and it bends his thumb sort of back in that direction. What that's going to do is put excessive stress on the ligaments stabilizing the thumb, and in this case, cause an actual fracture. We saw after that play, Paul was clearly grabbing at that area of his thumb, and specifically he's grabbing in an area called the first MCP joint, so MCP metacarpal phalangeal, basically where the metacarpal or the bone of kind of the palm of the hand meets up with the finger bone. So kind of this knuckle right here, that's that first MCP or the thumb MCP joint where he injured those ligaments. Looking at our biodigital anatomy tool here, we're looking at a right hand. So we've got the radius, we've got the ulna, and then we of course have that joint that we're talking about kind of circled right here, that thumb MCP joint. Now on the thumb here, we have two sides of ligaments. We have ligaments that sit here on what we call kind of the ulnar side, and then we have ligaments that sit over here called the radial side. These ligaments run on the outside of that joint, and they're analogous to like the MCL or the LCL down on the sides, stabilizing the knee. If we get rid of this first band of tissue, this is kind of the capsule that surrounds that whole joint, and then we'll see what we're left with here are going to be the ulnar collateral ligaments on the inside of that joint, and then on the outside, the radial collateral ligaments. Now you can see they're kind of floating there because some of these ligaments actually anchor into that capsule. But these are, I suspect, the ligament here on the inside, the ulnar collateral ligament, that got injured and basically pulled off the insertion from the bone, basically taking a chunk of bone with it, called an avulsion fracture. There's other ligaments around the thumb here, but just based on that location where Paul was grabbing, the mechanism of that thumb being pulled backward, this would be the most common thing that we would see. Whenever that ligament gets stressed and injured, you can either just clear tear through that ligament, you can strain it, or that ligament can remain intact, but just basically pull off a chunk of bone, which is that avulsion fracture. This is an x-ray demonstrating one of these avulsion fractures. So this bone right here is going to be that proximal phalanx, or kind of this bone of the thumb. This bone down here is going to be that thumb metacarpal. And you can see this chunk of bone that's basically been pulled away. So if we could see the ligaments, there'd be a ligament that basically ran kind of down in this direction on the thumb, where instead of the ligament tearing, the ligament popped off a piece of that bone. So going back to the play here, thinking of those ligaments stabilizing that inside portion of that thumb joint, as Paul follows through with his right hand, that thumb gets jammed at the forearm, causing it to bend excessively in the opposite direction, which stresses that ligament, in this case, causing the ligament to pull off a piece of bone from the finger. Prognostically, if this is in fact the more common injury involving that UCL ligament of the thumb, the big thing we worry about long-term is something called a Stenner lesion. It's basically one of the things that would make us say, yep, this needs a surgery. We have this big muscle that goes kind of through the web of our hand called the adductor pollicis. It's part of what helps adduct our thumb closer into the rest of our hand. And if we look with our anatomy tool here, you can see how this kind of aponeurosis, or part of the soft tissue of that muscle, basically inserts right near that ulnar collateral ligament. If that ulnar collateral ligament tears in such a way where that adductor aponeurosis is basically trapped and stuck between the ligament, it really makes it almost impossible for that ligament to heal. And so it's one of the times with these types of injuries where we actually do need to consider doing a surgery, because without going in there and kind of repositioning that ligament in the proper location, you can have a very poor chance of it healing. We can certainly assume if this is a UCL that they've already looked into this for Chris Paul and determined he doesn't have one of these types of injuries, and that hopefully just with some rest to allow that avulsion fracture to heal back in place, things will stabilize enough that he won't need a surgery. That's it for the video, everybody. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below, and until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.